Conflagrate is a new skill gem from Keepers of the Flame, and when I saw it announced, I realized that it had some potential to be utilized alongside the other new skill gem from the last league, Blast Rain of Charthus, as both damage over times will scale the same exact way and, of course, stack. This is important because unlike skills like Caustic Arrow, we actually have a secondary skill to, apply to enemies. Because one of the best things about being a bow build in Path of Exile is the fact that you have access to two sixlings, so that you can try to double up your damage through, other ways like mana forged arrows or totems. And the issue with Caustic Arrow is there's just no other skill that scales very similar like it, while Blast Rain of Charthus and Conflagration are essentially the same kind of skill, but they scale the same way, which is very important because now we can have two fire damage over time skills. Now, when I started it and League started it, I was convinced that I was going to be playing Conflagration, but it turns out Blast Rain of Charthus completely outpaces Conflagration in terms of clear. The clear on Conflagrate was like kind of okay, and the mechanic was kind of okay, but Blast Rain of Charthus is just so much better due to its AoE coverage and simple usage, right? And then Conflagrate is much better being relegated to a Mana Forge arrow link. And I've had a lot of fun with the build. I leveled a Lightning Conduit Elementalist until I got to maps. Then I did Heist for about maybe like a few hours on League launch. Then I bought some items to swap into Conflagrate. If you want more details on that, I have my day one video in the description. And then we were just playing Conflagrate and Blast Rain all the way through after that. It was very smooth transition as the skills actually got buffed as well before the patch happened, and their added damage was like raised significantly. So now they actually do decent damage. Overall, I really enjoyed the build, and we're going to talk about it today. First things off, I would heavily suggest not playing this build, not because I didn't think it was good, but because there are better builds out there, and there are also builds with better guides as well. Like, for instance, there's Righteous Fire by Pox, which has a much more in-depth guide than what you're going to get in the video today. Also, as well, there's also a Blaster build that I've been watching on the side and very envious of, Hierophant Kinetic Blast Clustering. Very satisfying skill, and I've been wanting to play it, and I saw Palstron play, and I've been a little envious, so that's another build I would suggest playing instead of this one. Now, Blast Rain of Charthus and Conflagration are different from other bow skills as they are applying a secondary debuff to enemies that deal fire damage over time. This does scale with projectile percent damage, but it mainly scales with fire percent damage and stuff like that. The issue is it does not scale with the flat damage on your bow. The only way to scale this damage, its base, is by raising its level of the gem, meaning that we have to do stuff like Empower and stuff like that. It's very similar to Caustic Arrow or like a spell damage over time spell if you've played stuff similar like Wintertide Occultist or stuff like that. Now, another thing as well is these both stack, so you can apply both debuffs at the same time and get double the amount of damage. And they have very similar gem scaling as well, which means that you can get very close to, parity with them. Unfortunately, we are putting Conflagration on a Mana Forge arrow link, which reduces its damage but improves its usability, as trying to just cast it normally is kind of annoying, to say the least. Now, Blast Rain of Charthus shoots out one arrow, it falls down, and then it shoots out in a cone. Conflagrate shoots down multiple arrows that when you walk by them, they explode and apply that secondary debuff. Now, to play this skill properly, or this skill pairing properly, for Blast Rain of Charthus, you just hold right click while you're clearing. You just right click a pack, bam, bloof, pack dead, right? Then for Conflagrate, what you need to do is you need to stand near the boss. Now, there are a few different ways of doing this. I've found that you can actually frost blink through the boss to proc the Conflagrate, because what'll happen is they'll go where your cursor is when it procs the Mana Forge arrow, and then you don't have to actually sit near the boss, but you do want to be nearby them enough for some other reasons later on, for some extra damage and some extra survivability. But essentially, you want to like be near the boss, but not like super near. Like, you can be near it enough to like proc it. Also as well, The base debuff is around like 6 or I think it's 4 seconds. So you have some time to mess around and dodge while you're waiting for your damage to be applied. So why are we playing Elementalist? Well, if you were under a rock for the last year, let me explain it to you. Elementalist gives us a lot of benefits, but mainly the ability to scale damage over time multi, percent damage, AoE, and shock scaling all at the same time. Because we can do golem stuff for damage over time multi and percent damage, and we can increase this with golem effect. We can do Shaper of Storms, which is like one of the main ways of scaling our damage significantly, as there's not many classes that can get access to such a high amount of shock very quickly. It's very hard to achieve this normally without Elementalist. You'd have to do something else like Necromancer or something like that, which would be annoying. Then, of course, as well, there's some defensive benefits like the recently buffed Shaper of Flames. This also is really nice as it will always apply an ignite with our attack, so we don't have to scale ignite chance anywhere on our gear, meaning that we can run gems like Combust and not feel like as though there's any downtime at all. Then, of course, Mastermind of Discord is another negative res scaling technique. The reason why we care so much about negative res, it's one of our ways of scaling DPS further, as we can't apply multiple debuffs of the same type. Like, I can't hit the target multiple times and apply Blaster into Charthus multiple times, as only one debuff will deal damage at a time. So that means that we have to scale our damage differently, like with Mastermind of Discord, exposure, negative resistance, curses, stuff like that. Now, speaking of damage scaling, let me talk about the ways that you can scale damage. First things off, shock scaling. Getting your shock all the way to 50% is like one of the easiest ways of scaling your damage, like with static blows. Primordial Bond with Cluster Jewels is also a way of doing it, as it will scale your damage over time multiplier and your percent damage and your AoE and your regen and your attack and cast speed for comfort and your regen at the same time. So it just scales all three, all of your nods at once, like your nodules at once. And then as well, it also makes your golems tankier so that they have more uptime. Sometimes when you're doing thicker content, like in T17s or 16.5s, and you're juicing it, sometimes you'll have golems die, especially in like Uber fights and stuff like that. So having access to extra golem life like this very easily is nice, but we'll talk about clusters when we get there. There are jewels like this that allow you to scale fire damage over time multi, fire percent damage, and life at the same time. That helps out a lot. You have level scaling techniques like with Skin of the Lords, where we +2 to level of socketed gems. The reason why this is so special is it allows you to run an Empower support in your gems, and Empower support will also upgrade the level of the gem that it's socketed with, so you can end up with a higher level in power, which is hard to get usually, and that allows you to scale the gem even further. Then also as well, we have other sources like damage over time multi on the amulet and +1 to fire skills. You could eventually get a +2 amulet, but that's absurdly expensive. Another thing with damage scaling is Widowhail. The reason why we're running it is our flat damage on our bow doesn't do anything, and there's not that many bow modifiers. It scales us in a way that is conducive to a functioning endgame build. So we actually eschew our bow and go with a Widowhail, which then increases the effect of our quiver. And our quiver has a bunch of stats we actually care about, like for instance, damage over time multipliers being tripled, our elemental damage with attack skills, that works by the way, so that's a bunch of percent damage. Attack speed's really nice because they have really long attack speed animation, so both the skills, so it helps out with like comfort and your mapping and stuff like that. Life as well for free, and then damage with bow skills also works. So we're getting a very large amount of percent damage, a very large amount of damage over time multi, life, and comfort. Now the thing is, if you go into PoB and you take off and put on this quiver, it's about 30% of our entire damage. So Widowhail is pretty damn good now, isn't it? Eye of Malice is another way of scaling damage. As I said, reducing enemy resistances is one of the main ways of scaling our damage. So Eye of Malice, increasing the effect of nearby enemies' resistance is worth it, because what ends up happening is, if you know how negatives work, if you increase a negative number, it becomes a bigger negative number. So if we have negative 50% resistance on enemies, that'll actually end up becoming like maybe negative 75% resistance on enemies. And it also gives us some nice cheeky fire exposure on hit early on. Legacy of Fury is another way of scaling our damage, as Scorched applies a debuff to enemies that reduces their elemental resistances. And The reason why I'm running these is because of the explosion that it provides. This inside of a breach allows you to completely kill the breach. It lets you kill very thick packs. It's mainly what RF builds use to increase their clear, and we can use it to increase our clear as well as we scale with everything on it. And also as well, it's a very easy and cheap way to get the +1 maximum endurance charge corruption as well. Now for cluster jewels, I actually ended up crafting my own cluster jewels. Now currently I am running Primordial Bond on 3 different cluster jewels. The main reason why we are doing this is because access to more jewel sockets. So the way that cluster jewels work is if you put in a bunch of large cluster jewels, you can end up with a copious amount of jewels in the sockets. So right now, just running these cluster jewels gives us like 6 different jewel sockets, which allows us to stack damage over time multiplier, HP, and percent damage all at the same time. Jewels are very efficient on this build, so you definitely want to eventually move into this. Now, the problem is there's not that many cluster jewels that are good for us, but Primordial Bond sticks out as it not only increases our area at the same time, it increases our damage, it increases our survivability. It does everything we want at the same time with the least amount of points. Now, to craft these, I would heavily suggest going for a Primordial Bond and then another, of course, affix on it as well. You generally want to go for at least 2 notables because you want to make it so that you always grab Primordial Bond in one of the first nodes, and then you want to shuffle around those nodes to the point where you only have to grab this amount of points on the cluster jewel. And you have to like do trial and error, but essentially you just reforge life on a eye level 68 to 70 minion 8 passive cluster. The reason why we're doing it at such a low item level is because we don't want more mods in the pool. We want specific mods in the pool, which this allows us to block bad mods or mods we don't want, so we can quickly craft these. Eventually you could craft better with more currency, but this is a league starter. I didn't really invest too much into it, and we just did it with reforge life. You could do it with fossils, but which is quicker technically, but I like harvest spamming, so that's what I preferred to do. Now, we have a few defensive layers for our build. One of the biggest things in endgame is fixing your physical mitigation. A lot of builds end up having problems in endgame because they're not fixing their physical damage reduction properly, and especially with all of the nerfs and changes that's been happening recently with physical damage taken as Ellie, as we just don't have access to much of it anymore. But we do have access to it as an Elementalist through things like Shaper of Flames. Now, this one's a little bit more interesting because what's happening is it is applying Ignite to enemies, and then they deal 40% of physical as fire. So we're not taking less physical damage from them or taking it as fire, but they are converting their damage for us, right? Then also as well, we're running a comms binding as well, which stacks with that. And pretty much we're converting 75% of physical damage into fire, which is then reduced by 75% again, which is like about like I think like 50 to 60% physical damage reduction. And that's on top of all the armor that we're scaling, which we are scaling armor thanks to stuff like Skin of the Lords. And we also have endurance charges thanks to Enduring Composure. Currently, we have like 6 endurance charges. Now, we also, of course, have eventually you want to get in iron reflexes on your Skin of the Lord with the gem sockets you want, mainly because we have a lot of evasion that could be converted into armor, which would end up being just more armor for us, because with the way that armor works, we want more of it, but we don't need too much, but we want a little bit more so that, we can reduce those small damage hits so we don't die. I am tinkering with one of the new jewels, the Foulborn Red Dream, which makes it so that passives granting fire resistance or all elemental resistance in the radius also grant maximum life at 75% of its value. The reason why we chose this specific part as part of the tree for this is we can grab 4 different strength nodes to turn into tattoos for fire res, and they give us a lot of increased life. Then also as well, devotion, the little life wheel there, it also gives us some HP as well extra on top of that, thanks to the all res it gives and all that. And then also as well, it is a good spot for us in general to be in because we can get hardy, which is a lot of life regen, and we can also get access to an endurance charge, and we can get access to the reduced mana cost to attacks, which allows us to be more comfy when we're clearing. Now for the grafts, I am running a Flame Caller's Off graft, which allows us to get Call of the Pyre, which applies Ash on hit. Essentially, it shoots forth tornadoes in front of you whenever you attack, and then those apply Ash. So that is our source of Ash. If you do not have this, you have to go with a Polaric Devastation instead, but this is how I'm currently getting my Ash debuff. Then also as well, we're running an Aegis Tool graft. The idea here is we have Preserving Stillness. It creates a little bubble for elemental damage whenever we apply exposure to enemies, and we're applying exposure all the time thanks to our gear, meaning that we're always getting this buff up. It's almost up all the time, and it's also giving us maximum elemental resistances as well on top of that. So just a lot of defensive power in this one item, and it allows us to take less elemental damage because of it. Now we're going to talk about our main links. Mainly, we want a level 21 Conflagrate. You can just level Conflagrates in your offhand and then corrupt them once you're done. You do not have to quality them, as the quality does nothing for us. So you just simply just run a bunch of Conflagrates, evolve them. If you get 21, good. If you don't, keep going. Mana Forge arrows, right? For the utility aspect of it, so we don't have to actually self-cast Conflagrate. Burning damage awakened because it can give +1 to Conflagrate. Elemental focus as well, it can give +1 to Conflagrate. We aren't running elemental focus on our main link, which I'll explain in a moment. And then we also have Swift Affliction, which is more damage, and then Efficacy, which increases the duration of the debuff on enemies, so we have more uptime and it's more damage. Now our main link, in the Skin of the Lords, we have Burning Arrow of Tarthus. The reason why we're self-casting this instead of, mana forging it is it's just a comfier skill to use in Conflagrate, and it just feels better to use. We also have Empower, which is being boosted by the Skin of the Lords. We have Burning Damage Awakened, which will eventually give +1 to our Burning Arrow of Tarthus when it's done leveling. Then Efficacy, same reasons as before. Swift Affliction, more damage, and then Combustion. Now, that's why we're actually not running elemental focus, is we can run combustion on the main link, and you want to apply ignite to all of those enemies that are on your screen with your main link. The reason why you want to apply ignite is, first things off, you want burning enemies, right? First things off. Second thing, you want ignited enemies so that you take less damage with Shaper of Flames. If you do not do this, you will only apply ignites with Conflagrate instead, which is a big no-no, because you want to apply the ignite on enemies so you take the less damage from Shaper of Flames. That is just the way to go, in my opinion. Now, before we end this video, I do want to talk about the farming strategies I use on this build. First things off, I leveled as Lightning Conduit, like I said. Then I went into lab before killing Katava once I was done with the campaign. Then I farmed it for a bit, got like 60 to 80 chaos. Then I bought some items for myself, including Blaster and Tarthus, as it's really annoying to get yourself. Then we swapped into Conflagrate. And then after that, I finished my Atlas. And then after that, I farmed Destructive Play and Heist for a while. That was for most of my gear. And then after that, I swapped to 16.5 map and Scarab farming. That was the main farm that I did yesterday for the final push in my gearing, when I swapped into Cluster Jewels and I got all the chonk for the build. But yeah, that's pretty much going to be it for the video today. With all that being said, this has been Dread. I'll have to go do something else. Bye.